Is that me? I'm on? 1 second. 1 second times 30. They were taking bets. They were taking bets if they would actually give you a robe because you kind of looked like a little less respectable than the rest of them. That's what they said. That's not what I said. That's what they said. So, carrying the Bud Light, they thought. I found that out a long time ago. We still fall for the same things that everyone else does. I'm on. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. Title of the speech is Don't Hijack My Amygdala, Bro. Anyone here know what an amygdala is? Besides Leonard? Okay, good. So we got a few people, so I'm happy that some of you don't. This is the things that we're hopefully going to talk about. I added this slide last second. Want to know why? Because Chris Silvers just gave a speech in the other room, said that you had to tell your people what you're going to tell them before you actually tell them what you're telling them, before you explain who you are. So this is what this is all about. This slide, hopefully this speech, what we're going to explain is, what is the amygdala? Can you really buffer overflow a human? And if so, how do you do it? And that's kind of been the status of my research for the last couple of years. So to do this, I wrote this speech out, and I had this really long scientific explanations everywhere, and then I gave it to one of my employees and said, hey, take a look at this. And they said, that's way too long and boring, and people are going to be sleeping in 30 seconds, so you need to kind of make it into a story. That's what you're good at. So I'm going to tell you a little story about who I am and how this all came about. I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, get comfortable, Chris, because the story's going to be good and you don't want to sleep. So first, my name is Chris Hadnagy. About 7 years ago, I started the social-engineer.org website, which it has the framework of what social engineering is, in my opinion. What makes it up? The psychological, physiological, physical properties and principles that make up social engineering. From that, I actually got approached by one company. He said, hey, you want to write a book? I said, no, I'm not an author. And he put an application in. Long story short, that company rejected me, said the book would fail. I said, you see, I knew that was right. And then he sent that application to another company, which is Wiley. They took it and said, please write the book. I didn't want to. My guy who was working with at the time, Matty Haroni from OffSec, he said, you better write the book. So I did, and so on and so forth. The book came out a couple years ago, and the name of it was Social Engineering, the Art of Human Hacking. And it defined what I thought a typical social engineer would need to know in order to do their job. From that, at the time, I still wasn't doing this full time. I was part of a pen test crew. We were doing training, but I formed a company which, oddly enough, is named Social Engineer Incorporated. And from there, I get to do these things each and every day. So what I do first is training. First and foremost, I get to train people what kind of things they should and shouldn't do in companies and corporations. I get to train security people on how to be social engineers, how to use these skills to test their company. I also get to do a lot of impersonation. That is not me, by the way. Those are not me. But I get to do impersonation to break into companies and to be able to, most of the things I do, if you might have heard speeches from people like Chris Nickerson or others who do a lot of red teaming, we're a little bit different in the way we handle it. We don't actually pick locks and scale walls and things like that. We walk up to the front door and we get the security guard to let us in. We get people. Shut up. Then that's my epic comeback for the weekend, by the way. So we get to do a lot of that. That's a lot of fun for us too. And we get to do risk assessments, which is sometimes things where companies say, we really don't want you to hack us, but we want you to tell us how you may hack us. So we go all the way up to the point of actually hacking them or social engineering them, and we tell them the avenues that we would have taken if they let us based on the information that we found. And, of course, we do penetration tests. Don't you love this picture? This is an epic picture. Can you not see that picture from the back? If you can't, stand up and see it. It's a chain with a master lock on it, and the chain broke, so they put a twisty tie in between the two chain links and kept the master lock on. That was an easy pen test. Anyhow, we get to do all these fun things. Now, here's the thing that happened to me. So after we're doing all these different types of services for our clients, we started to think about how do these things work? Because it's not so much that, for myself, I feel I'm one of those guys that wasn't born with these skills, right? I'm not a Kevin Mitnick. I didn't wake up one day and just have this natural. I had to learn these things. So we said, if I can learn them, is there a way that we can teach them? Can we turn them into math to some extent? Can we take these things and say, here's the equation that makes people tick and how we can actually influence other people? And after I had written my book, a couple funny things happened. Now, I'm one of these guys that let me see how I word this. You know, I have a buddy who, like, he wrote a book too, and he goes to Amazon every day, like 10 times a day, and he looks at all the reviews of what people are saying about him. And I would never check. And then something happened where there's a guy who I won't mention, his name starts with Richard, and he claimed one day that I was social engineering my reviews. I was social engineering my reviews because we had like 55-star reviews, right? And I was out at a training gig with Maddie, and I didn't have time to reply to him. And the community, you guys, all answered him on Twitter and started bashing this guy, saying that I'm a real person, I reviewed the book, blah, blah, blah. And I found that to be really heartwarming. But what would happen is I would look for bad reviews and tweet them because I thought they were funny. So this was one. This is a blind guy who listens to audiobooks and then writes reviews on them. And he hated me, not just my book, but me. I don't know why he hated me. I never met him. And I tweeted this. This was September 2012. I'm just going to zoom in on the portion that is the best, because if you can read this, it says right here, but while Mr. Hadnagy demonstrates this point with admirable clarity, social engineering in every other respect is an exercise in self-aggrandizement. I can't even pronounce that word. These 350 poorly composed pages are saturated by the author's ego, the masturbatory fantasies of which stain the entire work. Wow, who writes like that, right? I thought that was such an epically bad review that I tweeted it, and my sales went through the roof. Went through the roof. My publisher calls me the next week, and she says, whatever you did last week, do it again. I go, I didn't do anything last week. She said, well, you did something because your sales went up. And I'm like, the only thing I did was tweeted this really horrible review. It's staining every page of my book. And she goes, tweet it again. So I did. My sales went through the roof. I'm like, wow, I need more people to write me bad reviews. Anyhow, all of this leads to somewhere. Anybody know this guy? The nurse, right? We all know the nurse, right? We love this guy. He passed away. Earlier this year. He had a stroke down in Hacker Halted, struggled with recovery for months and months, and then ended up passing away. Everyone who knows him loves this guy. When we were at DEF CON together one day, and I was telling him, I was running the CTF, the social engineering CTF there, and I said, I think I'm just going to kind of crawl back into my hole and do my thing, and kind of give, not just, those reviews like that were pounding on me, and I just wasn't liking it. And anyone who knows Brad knows that the guy is a ball of positivity. And just the way Brad spoke to me, I wish I could duplicate, I wish I had it recorded just to show you, because I'm not going to do it justice and I'm not going to try. But what he said to me was basically that because I had learned these skills, that it would be a crime against the community to not really continue my research and then help others learn it. And he motivated me to do something that I had been wanting to do for years, but didn't have the guts to go do. And that is, anyone know who this guy is? Anyone know him? If you don't, you will after this speech. His name is Dr. Paul Ekman. Anyone ever see the show Lie to Me? Okay, so first season was great. Everything else after that stunk, right? Well, he's the scientific mind behind that. Dr. Ekman is the guy who in the 1960s went to Papua New Guinea and began his research on facial expressions and body language, and was able to prove scientifically that facial expressions are universal across culture, gender, age, no matter where we are, where we're from, that facial expressions exist across every human, even infants, even blind people who can't see have similar microexpressions when it comes to emotional content. And he spent the last 60 years of his life researching that. And I loved his books and I loved his research, and I thought there was something profound for us in the security community in his research, and that the way that he conducted his research can help us to understand what makes people tick. And if we can understand what makes people tick, then as a social engineer, I can use that, but also as a security professional, I can use it to help my clients stay protected because they're more aware. So I reached out to him, And honestly, to this day, I can tell you I don't know why he gave me the time of day. I'm a nobody. I don't have the master's degrees like he has. I don't have the education that he has. I'm not a scientist like he is, but I just expressed to him my passion like I just did to you for what I believe to be the truth, and he gave me a few hours of his time. And after a few hours, he reviewed my course. I have a 5-day course that I was writing at the time on how to be a social engineer, and there's 1.5 days we devote to nonverbal communications. And he reviewed it, and he corrected many errors that I had. And then he started to mentor me. And over the last 2.5, 3 years, I had a chance to work with Dr. Ekman multiple times. The most recent was a day before I came here in New York City, and learning how humans tick, what makes them react a certain way to emotional content, what makes a human internally and then physiologically show a certain emotion because of what you're showing. And that really is the basis of my research. So I'm telling you this long version or shorter version of a long story, because that's what led me to here today, was the combination of that really horrible review, Brad Smith, and then Dr. Ekman. And what I hope to express is that this research is done to a scientific nature. This is not something that we're trying to make up. This can be proven through science. So the first thing I had to do was define social engineering. So I defined it very broad. And the definition that I gave to social engineering was any act that influences a person to take an action that may or may not be in their best interest. I gave it a broad definition because I think social engineering is positive sometimes. Right? How many of us have kids? How many of us feel that we get influenced by our kids? All the hands go back up, right? Our spouses, our mates, our clergy, our therapists, our boss, our coworkers, the people that work for us. All of these people, we either social engineer or social engineer them each and every day. It doesn't mean that it's negative. Right? We're not saying that these things are happening because we're manipulating people. We influence the way people may view us, our message, our content, or anything else that we're trying to offer up to them by using influence skills and the same skills that a social engineer will use. In the same text, all the bad things we can look at, phishing emails, phone elicitation, impersonation that is done in a malicious sense, the same exact skills are used by those people in order to influence someone to make you take an action that you shouldn't. Clicking a link, giving a credit card number, doing other things like that. So I had to pick this apart to go on with scientific research. The way it's done is you have to take each piece and say, how do you now define this even lower? So I had to define influence. And influence is defined, and this is not my definition, this is actually a definition from Dr. Robert Cialdini. If you haven't heard of him, you should look him up. He wrote a book called Influence, an amazing book, and he defines 8 different principles to influence in that book. But he talks about getting a person to want to do what you want them to do. Now that's different than manipulation, right? If I manipulate you, then you do what I want you to do, but at the end, you kind of have buyer's remorse, right? You feel bad about it. You're just like, I'm not sure if I should have done that. But if I influence you, then you do what I want you to do, and at the end, it was your idea. And you're happy for doing it. And it doesn't leave you feeling bad. You feel good for having done what I asked you to do. So using principles of influence, how can we do that psychologically to another person without them even knowing it? Basically, buffer overflow, override the code that generally runs inside of a person and create in them the emotional content that you want. Well, let's discuss that. So Robert Cialdini, I already mentioned him, he talked about these principles of influence, and we won't go through all of these, but these are the list of what makes up influence. And if you have questions on these, I'd be happy to answer them afterwards. We can talk about this topic in great detail, because I can give a whole day lecture on this stuff, because this is amazing. When you look at how each one of these work, and you try to look at examples that aren't just individually, but how marketing people use them, how the government uses them, how other news and media outfits use these principles, you begin to clearly see each and every day how we are all being influenced by those items around us. How we, especially let's say in this culture in America, where we are so drawn into media, to TV, to entertainment. Dr. Ekman has a very strong belief that it is the entertainment of today that is, and I say this even though there's a Halo booth right outside, that is wrecking the ability for children to communicate effectively. The difference between being able to just use 140 characters to communicate your message to the violence in video games that is ultra-realistic, that it is creating new psychological channels in children's brains that they are not able to react to emotional content like they used to. That's another whole area of research. But these articles of influence, these principles of influence, play on that, and that's what we need to understand in order to go further with this research. Social influence, to me, is the strongest of them, right? Think about social influence. Yeah, that's just a meme. Social influence told me to eat sand. I did it like a boss. That kid's on like 500 memes, right? Social influence, we become a tribe. This room is a tribe. We are all part of this room, right? So we are part of a tribe because we are here listening to the same speech. We're also a tribe because we're part of this conference. So we're all here part of a hacker conference. We call ourselves hackers or makers or whatever it is that we're part of that group. We are part of that tribe. Now, someone comes in from the outside and they don't fit. We can kind of notice that, right? They don't talk the same talk. They don't understand what we're talking about. They're not part of that tribe. We have to discern, do I trust them yet or not? And we do that off of multiple different things. First, we do that off the way a person looks. You want proof of that? Go to any high school. How many of us went to an open campus, a bigger high school? So we have a few. When you went to an open campus school, and you can stand in the lunchroom, do you ever take notice of, like, you can see, right? Where did the ROTC sit? Where did the jocks sit? Where did the skaters sit? Where did the surfers sit, right? And you knew it, and you knew which groups were which. Why? Because they looked exactly like each other. We're all individuals except when we're in our own group. Then we look like our group. It's just the way social influence works. When our group or our tribe says that something is okay, then we comply easier because I don't have to make that decision. An amazing piece of research was done just about 3 or 4 years ago. They took a survey and they asked people to vote on it. And in the first page, they took, I think it was like 225 test subjects, and half of them got this page, and it talked about using torture. The U.S. military using torture against detainees. And the first page said that torture hadn't been previously used, and they were looking for your opinion on torture being used, and then they described the torture, things like waterboarding, the sleep deprivation, other things like that. The second page that the other half got, it had the same exact thing with one change, and it said that this procedure has been used for the last 40 years in the U.S. military. Which one do you think got more votes for using torture, A or B? How many people say A? How many people say B? Yeah. Why? Because of one reason. That one line that said for 40 years it's been used, so it became acceptable. It became acceptable because the tribe said, I don't have to make the decision if torture is okay. My grandfather made that decision. So as long as he says it's okay, who am I to argue? And that social responsibility, when it gets taken away from us, something happens psychologically where we begin to accept things that we wouldn't normally accept. This is a totally off-topic, deep subject that we won't get too much into, but if you watch any of the interviews with Nazis that were arrested afterwards, does anyone know what their main reason for all the atrocities they did, what they said? I'm sorry? Everyone else was? That's one? What did you say? Following orders. This was the main thing that they said in their court cases. When they're being brought to court, I was just following orders. That was the excuse. Social proof said, following orders means if I don't follow orders, I may end up where these people are. All my other compadres are doing it, so it must be okay, I'm going to do it. These things influence people, and we're not just talking about clicking a link or giving your credit card to do amazing atrocities throughout history. So this is obviously a powerful psychological principle that we're going to talk about here. So anyhow, this is my research. This is hard to see. I'll blow it up in a minute. But what I had to do is I started to define, no, I can't. I write like a chicken got a pen stuck in its butt and ran across paper. It's terrible. It's really bad. I can't write. I really can't. My mother always said that I should have been a doctor. I just don't make that much, but I write like one. So I'm going to blow this up so we can see it and try to make it simplistic. But what I had to do for myself to understand this concept was define through different areas of research how this works, how we can understand this and simplify it to a mathematical equation so it can be used by security people. So the first thing I always try to do when I have something that complex is to make it much more simplistic so we can try to understand it. And then if we can simplify it, then anyone can learn it. So the first thing I did, let me blow up the research and let me explain it. That's really hard to see, isn't it? Okay, well, let me just talk to you a little bit about what this says here. This box right here, this first box, talks about your 5 senses. So we have 5 senses that we take in content from other people. Our main being our sight, our hearing, our smell, we feel, and we can taste things. All of these things can trigger emotions. Every single one of our senses can trigger emotions. And that's what's the amazing part about our senses. How many of us have ever smelled something that brings us back to childhood, whether it's good or bad? How many of us have ever done that? Right? A bunch of people shaking their heads. So that olfactory sense is linked to certain neurons in our brain that when you smell something, and if it was something that was pleasant to you, or if it was something that made you sick, it will actually recreate that emotional content that you had, even if it was 10, 20, 30, 40 plus years ago, maybe like in Chris Silver's case, 50, 60 years ago, because he's like really old, and it might be like, ancient times where you can recall those same exact emotional feelings that you have because of one thing, and that's smell. One thing, and that's smell. And then, whatever that content is, that's what this part is. So whatever that content is, whether it's emotion or feeling, it goes into the part of our brain called the amygdala. Okay, now, that's this picture. So the amygdala is part of our limbic system, and it's this little tiny almond-shaped piece of our brain down here, all the way on the bottom, near our hypothalamus and near our cerebellum, all the way down here, right? So we have this little tiny piece. What happens with the amygdala is it takes in all of our feelings, emotions, and the content that comes with it, and it processes it. And then it outputs information to create physiological responses. Let me give you an example of how this works. So I'm about 12 years old. We moved from New York City area to Pennsylvania. And my mom, she decides she wants to have chickens. That's what people in Pennsylvania do. They have chickens, right? So we get chickens. And chickens aren't bad. We get fresh eggs every morning. I liked eggs. It was pretty cool. So I'm about 12 or 13 thinking I'm going to cook some eggs for myself. I go out, grab some eggs from the chicken, start up a frying pan, crack the egg in the frying pan. What do you think comes out? A chick. A bloody, disgusting, dead chick frying in the pan. I started gagging and heaving all over the place. It was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. It literally took me about 20 years after that point to eat eggs again. Why? Every time I saw an egg frying in a pan, it triggered a physiological, get this, forget about psychological, a physiological response was triggered, and I felt nauseous. I didn't see a dead chick every time an egg opened. I wasn't picturing it, but something happened in my brain psychologically that was so strong from that one event that every time I smelled or saw an egg frying, it triggered that same neurological response, and I actually felt like I was going to puke again. That's how strong this principle is. So the amygdala, it sends out all of these different processes to physiological responses. It could be something positive, right? Maybe it's you see something that you like. Calm and quiet. And it gets you excited, or it gets you happy, or it makes you feel good. And when you see those things, a physiological response happens. You smile, maybe your heartbeat goes up. Other physiological responses could occur. Those things all are triggered from this process of the amygdala. But something else really interesting happens, and that's what is pointed out down here, is that after the amygdala starts processing, you can almost compare it to a computer. So you have a computer, our brain, and it starts to put all of its processing power into the amygdala to handle the amazing amount of data coming into it. Smell, sight, feeling, taste, the emotional content, the neurological triggers, the electronic responses in your brain. And what happens is this processor, this type of processor, kicks in. Now, if the right emotional response is triggered, what happens is the amygdala gets hijacked. And it shuts down the logic center, the logic processing center of your brain. And this can be up to 3 hours. After you have a strong emotional response, it can shut down your logic processing center for up to 3 hours before it returns to normal processing power. You want proof of this? How many of us have ever gotten an email from someone that totally enraged us? A text or an email, and you replied before you thought. And after you read your reply, you went, oh my God, why did I do that? How many of us ever done that? Okay, and those of you that didn't raise your hand, you're lying, right? So, no, maybe not. But many of us have done that, right? You ever see that commercial? Or I think maybe it was a sitcom or something. The guy does that, and he goes and he like tries to get back all the computers and the cell phones, and he chucks them, and then he realizes it was never sent. It was stuck in the outbox or whatever. Because that humor is funny to us because we've all done it. Psychologically, what's happening is this process. We had emotional content. Something came into our eyes. We read it. It created a physiological response, which was anger. The response was so strong, it shut down our logic processing powers, and it created a physical action, which was that email or that text in return. Later on, when we calm down, what happens is we read that and we go, oh my, why did I just say that? And you wish you can take it back because logic centers kick in. If we know this to be a fact, and this is all proven through different studies and proven through different psychological studies, then this can be used by social engineers to create the influence principles, the influence properties with other people to get them to do whatever you want. So let me ask you. Oh, look, I did have it blown up. Wow, I'm a keynote genius. Wow, I did. Shut up. Okay. So, which emotion would you pick to use for the human buffer overflow? 7 base emotions. Ekman identified 7 base emotions: happiness, anger, disgust, contempt, surprise, sadness, and fear. Which emotion do you think is the strongest and the one that creates amygdala hijacking the easiest? I hear fear, I hear disgust. Boredom is not an emotion, it's a feeling. But if you're bored, I'm sorry. If you're bored and you're getting angry at me, does that mean you're going to hurt me? Who said that? I heard happiness, I heard sadness, I heard surprise. Everyone, you're guessing all 7, aren't you? Okay, so let's say what I heard the most was, I think I heard anger, I heard happiness, and I heard sadness. So how many people think it's happiness? Couple. How many people think it's anger? And how many people think it's sadness? Well, you two, and you cheated because you're my daughter, you two win the prize. So you get a sticker afterward, okay? Come up front. Now, why? Why is sadness the emotion that creates the amygdala hijacking the most? First of all, before we answer that, let's talk about why anger would not be the right emotion. What happens physiologically to you when you feel angry? I'm sorry? Adrenaline. First thing, adrenaline. Adrenaline kicks in. Your body starts producing chemicals like adrenaline. It stops producing chemicals like oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine. It stops producing all of those, and we start to produce adrenaline. Something else happens physiologically. What else? Tense, right? You ever see people get angry? What happens? Everything tenses up. Their fists clench, their teeth clench, everything gets tight. Why does that happen? Our body is saying fight or flight, and it's making a decision to fight. And that's what anger creates, is a fighting response. If you create the emotion of anger in your targets, you think they will comply? No, they won't comply. They're going to get mad at you. and that anger may be something that creates a very hostile environment, not a friendly environment. So sadness, what feeling is closely linked to sadness? Give me one. And not you, cheat. What? I'm sorry? Compassion, great. Another one. Who said it? Empathy. Who said it? You back there? Yes, excellent. Empathy and compassion. And I'm going to go with empathy as being stronger. Why? Because when we empathize with people, what does that mean? I'm sorry? Would you say Zip? Communicate, and who said it over here? We feel what they feel. And this is powerful. If I can make you empathize with me, then you will feel my emotional content. And if I can create the ability for you to feel my emotional content, we're part of this tribe now. We're part of a tribe. And when we're part of that tribe, I can use social proof, reciprocation, obligation, all these other principles on you to make my wants your idea. This is a powerful, powerful principle. So how do we do this? Okay, well, we go back to this. So if we know that the proper emotional response up here, is empathy, We know that we want to create empathy or sadness, and we don't want to go to the extreme, right? So now we're talking extreme sadness or grief. We're going to, if again, in the social engineering environment, we're going to make people think that we're nuts, right? If we come into an office building weeping, terribly weeping, tears running down our face, distraught with a razor against our wrist, we're not going to get the server room, right? We're going to get 911. So we don't want to go to that level. And that's why empathy brings that down a notch, and it creates that feeling what I feel. So if we know that's the case, we know it will trigger in the amygdala certain physiological responses. What responses occur when you feel sad or empathetic? Physiological now. Who could take a guess? I'll tell you what happens. First, muscularly, we get a little smaller. It takes us down. We're not tense when we feel sad. What else happens to our face is it becomes less tense. Our muscles in our face begin to relax. Our voice lowers like this. We don't get so loud. When we feel sad or empathetic, everything becomes lower. And when we're lower, how do we appear to other people? Humble. And humility is a great quality when it comes to social engineers. So everything gets lower. It creates this physiological response. And if you can almost think lower, what else gets lower is someone's shields. Those red flags, they all go down. And now they're more open to interjection of that buffer overflow, of that code, of what you want to interject. So we know that this is the physiological response. We know that this logic processor will be hijacked. And now comes the next part. Tell me, when you look at this picture, what do you see? Can you see that okay? If you can't, stand up and take a look. This is a really, really powerful picture. So, my wife is from Thailand, so every now and then we follow news from that area of the world. And there was a refugee camp on the border of Myanmar and Thailand that caught on fire. 40 people died. A horrific accident. It started with a cooking fire, and everything was made with old cloth tents. It was just a terrible place to be. And she's 15 years old, and she watched her whole family burn to death. Now, this is a true story. I'm not doing this to influence you guys. This is a horrible, horrible story. This picture was snapped from her right after the event. What you see in her face is extreme grief. But you don't need to know the story to know that she's in pain, do you? You don't need to know what just happened to her family and her to know that she's in severe pain. You can see it because of her facial expression. You can see it because of her body language. And you don't need to know that what happened. You just know that something very bad occurred. And it would be uncommon. It would be uncommon, and it would be almost sociopathic for someone to see this picture and think it was humorous. It would be uncommon, right? Unless you were anticipating me to pull a joke on you at this point and think, oh, I'm lying, that was my sister. It's not, okay? This is a real story. But unless you were anticipating that, for someone to just gaze upon this picture for the last 30 seconds like I did, I've actually did this at a class, and I had people crying after viewing this picture up close for some time. Why? Because something happens in our brain. We begin to mirror the emotional content that we see in other people. Have you ever walked into a room where a bunch of people are angry? What happens to you? Do you feel a little more defensive? You feel a little more tense? Even if you've been angry yourself, you feel a little more tense, don't you? That's what happens because the emotional content of those around us affects us. When you walk into a room and everyone's laughing, what happens? You feel happy. You start smiling. Well, when you look at this scene for too long, you'll start to feel sad. Now, again, I'm not being a proponent of saying going into your office building, your next SE gig, looking like this, because this is not good. But when we analyze the facial expressions and body language of people who do this, we can pick apart certain things. And that's what we're going to look at now. So we need to understand the nonverbals that can elicit sadness or empathy. And there's a few that have been identified by researchers such as Ekman and others. Here's the first. This is actually Dr. Ekman back in the 70s. This is a very interesting facial expression because if I had a block, I would block everything from here down because you see almost nothing. What you see here is what's called a conversational signal. You will see this now all day, every day, and all tonight when you're talking with people, and you will hate me for it. And because you'll be watching people's foreheads. Everyone hear of the FACS program, FACS or FACES? FACES program over here? Okay, if you haven't heard of it, In the 70s, Dr. Ekman and Maureen Sullivan started a program identifying what they called action units, which is muscles that move in our face and create the facial expressions. Once you understand it from a physiological standpoint, you can know which muscles are triggered. Okay, we won't go too deep into that. But this is called the conversational signal. When you're ever talking with someone and you're doing all the talking, and you want to know that they're listening to you, so what do? They kind of raise their eyebrows a little bit and give you a little head shake. Right? Many of you have been doing this the whole time I'm up here, right? Because we're not really having a conversation. And when I ask you questions, like this guy over here, he's constantly doing that, raising his eyebrows and doing this. I'm listening to you. That's what he's saying. I'm listening to you. I get it. I'm listening to you. Well, this is also a sign of sadness. When we feel extremely sad, and if I go back here, oops. Oh, keynote fail. Sorry, we have to go through all of this wonderfulness. There, if we go through here, and you can, it's hard to see, but you can see that her forehead has this same crinkle in it. And this physiological response to sadness creates this environment, this muscular movement in our forehead where it actually wrinkles like this. When we do that, our brains don't say it. You don't sit there and go, oh, look, that person's forehead is wrinkling. He must be sad. What happens is neurologically, our brains start to mirror the emotional content that we see. And it will create in you the feeling of empathy or sadness. Another really strong one. This is called eye blocking. Eye blocking is something that you will see now when you go on the internet. Look at any time that there is a funeral. There is someone in high power that's put in front of the courts. You want to see it? You want to see it in real life? Take a look at when Bill Clinton was being impeached. And you'll see this when he's being interviewed all the time. He does this. Or when Hillary was being interviewed about what Bill did, she would be doing this all the time. There's another form of eye blocking. Eye blocking is basically a response saying, out here is embarrassing and painful. So I'm going to block my vision from what I see because I want to block the pain. Something in here is much more pleasant than what I can see out here. People who are nervous, they feel sad, you will see many people do this many, many times. It's called eye blocking. So this kind of an eye block, again, this is very extreme, but it's a good example to show you of how this looks, can be used to create this feeling in other people that this guy's a little nervous, right? This guy's a little nervous, a little sad. I wonder what's wrong with him. And it creates an empathetic feeling, a bond between you and the target person. Another one, this is a very extreme version of worry, right? So the whole face is involved in worry, and we can see an extreme eyebrow crinkle up here, but we also see that these corners of the eyebrows are brought up. This is a very strong display. And by the way, you just did the eyebrow thing. Thank you very much, letting me know you're listening. I appreciate it. But we see this many times when people are feeling sad and they don't want to cry, or they don't want to show that emotion. You'll see people tense up their foreheads. Like if I open my eyes really wide, then maybe the tears won't come out. And you'll just think I'm sitting here listening to you, but I'm really, really nervous or scared. You'll see this many times when people feel that way. And then, of course, you have just standard sadness. And this is not extreme, like in the case of the Thai girl. This is a little more subtle, but you can see this in multiple places. First, in the corners of the mouth. You can see this in the forehead with the eyebrow crinkle here, and of course in the eyes. So how do we use all this? Okay, how do we utilize this? Because again, I'm not being a proponent of going into a building crying. So I'm going to give you an example. Because we're talking about shutting down the logic centers. I had this gig once where my job was to get a USB key loaded with malware. I say malware, but not malicious, onto the computer. This was the only purpose of the test. They had a strict policy that no outside USB devices were allowed to be plugged into any computer. But even though that was a rule, a corporate policy, they didn't shut off USB ports. Even though that was suggested by many people, including us. So what I did is, and many people, including us, had tried other ways to get into the building. They were pretty standard at saying, nope, sorry, can't help you. USBs left in the parking lot. People would pick them up, and we would put all sorts of things on them, employee bonuses, the standard things, pornography, please return to accounting, private use only. And you would put all those little labels on your USB keys, and nobody would put them in. We were epically failing. So I took a manila folder and I had a bunch of resumes for my fake person printed up, put a tie on. I went to this company, and right as I'm in the parking lot, I took my cup of coffee and I poured it on my resumes. Then I walk into the building and I'm doing this. Now, I'm not crying, but I'm really stressed. Right? This is very subtle. You may not be able to see it, but my eyebrows are stressed, my tense is in the forehead, and I lowered myself a lot. And I lowered my voice because, as you can tell, I project quite loudly, and that can come off really, really bad to some people. As soon as I walk in the door, the secretary sees me. She goes, "Oh, honey, what's wrong?" And I had just walked up to her desk, and I saw on her desk that there was a picture, grandkids, kids, I'm not sure, but they're all playing with a cat. So I say, "Oh, I was just driving here for an interview, and this cat ran out in front of me. I didn't want to kill it, so I slammed on my brakes, and my coffee fell out of the holder, poured all over my car. It ruined my last set of good resumes. I got an interview in like 5 minutes from now. I need this job. I've been unemployed for like the last 5 months. I don't know what to do." And she's like, "Oh, how can I help?" I said, "I don't even know if this will work because it got wet, but I got this USB key with some resumes on it. Maybe you can just print me out a copy." She takes it without even thinking. She pops it in the USB port, and I had 2 copies in there. She goes, "Which one?" I said, "Oh, click that one. That's, of course, the malware version, which crashed Word." And then she says, "It's not working." I said, "Oh, then try the other one. It's a little outdated, but it will work." That one works. She prints it. I get a text message that says, "Shell." And then she goes, "Well, what time's your interview?" I said, "Oh, I'm supposed to be with Miss Stacy at 11 a.m. She goes, "Miss Stacy? No, there's no one named Miss Stacy here." And I go, "This is XYZ Company, right?" And she's like, "No, XYZ Company is next door. This is ABC." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm in the wrong place," which I wasn't. And she's like, "Come with me. I'll take you over." And this woman leaves her post to take me over to the other company. And I'm going, "Oh, crap, I don't know if there's someone there named Miss Stacy." So I'm like, "You know what? I forgot something in my car. I'm just going to go get it. You've been such a help. It's okay. You go back to work." And we parted ways, and everything worked. Was it only because of that? I'm going to say no. There was other factors that definitely helped. But I really honestly feel that when we analyze that approach, what worked, because nothing was working in this company, was the ability to use empathy, trigger that amygdala hijacking, shut down the logic centers, and getting her to comply with a wish that she had not complied with previously and no one else in the company was complying with. This is just funny. At the point, I found this ad online. I thought this was funny. "I saw you at Tiki Bob's. You grabbed my butt. I told you if you did it again, I'd kill you. You did. I need your address now." And she puts her phone number. Anyhow, that's not the kind of requests that you want to make, right? So we have to say, what kind of requests do you make after you hijack someone's amygdala? What kind of requests do you want to make? Well, they can't be huge, right? Because it has to be compensatory with the pretext that you have. If I went to that woman, "I don't know what you can do for me. Maybe you can give me your corporate passwords," right? All empathy goes out the window, right? It's not going to work. Or maybe you can go to this website and click on this link. Again, red flags go up. So the request has to be equal to the emotional content at hand. It has to be equal to the emotional content on hand. Since I'm not going to extreme grief, we need to make that request something small, something that would be doable, something that would be easy to forget, like a USB drive, or "Can you just answer this one question?" And when we make those kinds of requests, what happens internally, psychologically, the person's no longer thinking. Logically, "Man, the corporate policy says I shouldn't be inserting this USB key." Instead, what happens is they go, "Well, this needs help. How can I possibly say no?" And all the principles of influence kick in, and the action is taken. So, human buffer overflow. This is the equation for it. First, you need an emotional trigger. You need the emotional trigger to occur. That is going to be what you present to the person, your nonverbal emotional triggers, your story, including your nonverbals. This is very, very important, okay? It can't be just words. I want you to envision this. I walk up to the secretary, and I'm doing this. So anyhow, I'm driving down the road, and this cat runs out of me, stupid thing, and I almost killed it. And I'm really sad, by the way. Can you put this USB key into your thing and print me out a... Not going to work, is it? Emotional content isn't there, even though the story may hit a bone on her because she likes cats. I had to mirror what my content should be. A sad person doesn't come in with their hands up and their chest up. They come in a little bit lower, and they come in a little dejected. I may have just ruined my chances at this job. If I don't get this job, I can't feed my family. If I can't feed my family, I don't know what we're going to do. And it's been 4 months since I've been working. I can go back and say, hit the cat and ate it. You're right. Maybe that would have been a good story. I hit the cat. It's in my trunk. I don't know how to skin a cat. Can you come help me? That may have been a good one. I'm not sure. Maybe I would have got help with that. Maybe she would have called 911. I don't know. So your emotional trigger is usually the story or the pretext. It has to have supporting nonverbals. And then the last piece of that equation is a reasonable request. A reasonable request. And by the way, someone asked me this. Yes, that is actually the hex of all the words that is there. So a reasonable request needs to occur. And that request has to be reasonable to the story, the pretext, and the target. Okay, those three things are important. If your request is unreasonable to the pretext, to the person, and to the story, it's not going to be honored. Instead, you're going to remove all that empathetic feelings, all that hijacking that you did, and you're going to replace it with up wall and red flags. So once you do all that, you shut down their logic centers, you've hijacked their amygdala, and you're able to now insert that request and use this as one of your effective social engineering tools. Okay, we have a few minutes. Questions on any of this that hopefully I'll be able to answer. Yes. Okay, so going back to the beginning. No. Any questions at all? Please, nothing is too small. I'll just say I don't know. Yes, sir.
Now, knowing this, can you then project false cues?
Yes. Heck yeah. Right? So, and that whole story was false. So I wasn't feeling sad at all. I just almost hit a cat. That was all made up for her to get me to put the USB in there, right? So all of that was false. The power of this is that when we know that's the way the human brain works, and the human brain will mirror the emotion. It will. It has to. You want proof of that? Watch people tonight. When you're out eating, drinking, watch small groups of people, and you will see that as if you have 3 or 4 people all over here laughing, and some guy walks up and he walks into that little tribe, you'll see after a short period of time, he'll be laughing and loud and boisterous. People will begin to mirror the actions and emotional content of those around. And it happens fast. There's a great study by a psychologist called Joseph Campos. Dr. Campos did a study. He's out of UCLA. And he took 8-month-old babies, and he tortured them. No, he didn't. I'm just kidding. I just wanted to see what you guys would do. And he had this table, this long table. And underneath the table, he had a checkerboard. And it was plexiglass all the way across. So no babies were going to be hurt at all. They had to make sure the babies couldn't communicate with words. Okay, that was the most important part. Now, halfway across the table, about 2 feet in, it looks like the table drops off to the floor. It just looks like it goes 6 feet down. Now, the plexiglass is all the way across, so the baby can't get hurt, but it looks that way. On the other side of the table, now the baby's over here, and the other side of the table is a toy, something that the baby would really want. But the mother is there. The mother is instructed, you're not allowed to speak. You can do one of 2 things. You can show a fear expression, which is, right, so lips back, eyes, and a gasp like this, or you can show a happy expression, full happy, right, because babies can read fake facial expressions. This is a new study that just came out, I think, 2 weeks ago. So you have to have the whole eyes triggered, right, the mouth, the whole thing, body language, and you're just supposed to sit there and shake your head and smile. Every baby, every time, if the mother showed fear, the baby wouldn't cross. You actually have a video. If I had time, I'd show you. You see the baby, and he comes up to the corner, and he's doing this. And he says, should I go over? And they don't go over. And when the mom smiles, the baby doesn't even look at the visual cliff. Bam, just walks right over, just crawls right over and goes right to the mom. Showing that facial expressions trigger the emotions within other people. So the baby saw, mom said, holy crap, and I know something's bad. I don't know what it is, but all I know is I'm going to get hurt if I go past this point. Mom says everything's good. Man, I trust her, right? She gave me life. I'm sorry? I don't know. We should do that study later on. 20 years from now, there's an influx of kids walking off tables, killing themselves. Mom smiles, and I jumped off a bridge. Yes, sir. Oh, so let me just get the question right. You're asking are there any studies into medications that change the response to physiological triggers like this? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so there's a few things. If I have the time for a second, there's a few things. First, is, and I won't get deep into this. This is always a topic everyone likes, but this is beyond the scope of social engineering. Sociopaths and psychopaths, this will not work on. First of all, a sociopath does not feel empathy, so you cannot make them feel the same emotional content that you would to a normal person. And the psychopath, their empathy or joy feelings will come from the pain of others. So I doubt that any social engineering gig that I'm ever involved in, I hope, would involve, hey, come help me torture this person. And they go, yay, here's my passwords. So that usually is not going to occur. So forgetting those two, any person, and we think about the triggers here, right? So we think about this amygdala. Any person who has a problem within this limbic system, right? I was just talking to a person who is having, there's a little piece up here called the basal ganglia. It's not on this this chart, but there's a little piece up here called the basal ganglia. And I just was talking to a person here at this conference about this research, and they were saying they're having therapy for their basal ganglia. That would probably create a more difficult ability for that person to be triggered emotionally. More difficult. Now, they may feel the emotion, but what happens is now when they get that sensory input, when that emotional content comes in, the physiological responses that are shot out from the amygdala may not occur as quickly. They may not occur, okay? But you can still trigger the emotion unless someone has a neurological problem. So the way our brains are wired, the way we are made to work, is that when you see an emotion, you feel that emotion. It is why method acting is so popular. You ever watch a movie and you're like, that actor was so good, and you're crying with him, you're happy with him, you're sad with him, you hate him. It was a movie we watched years and years and years ago. Brad Pitt was in it, and my wife, and he was a bad guy, and my wife hated him for like 10 years. He was so good at being a bad guy, she hated him. Any movie he's in, I hate him. He's a jerk. I can't stand that guy. Why? Well, she believed his part. It became something that she judged him on because he was such a good bad guy. These things happen to us. Do I have time or no? I don't have time. I had a really great story I tell you about one time when I used manipulation in the pen test. And to this day, I'll never, ever get a gig from that company again because I left them feeling so bad it was terrible. And that's what happens when you use negative emotions. People will begin to feel that way, and then they can't get past it. Yes? Paul's telling me, no, ops guys here is going to tase me. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to shut down, and then we'll go out in the hallway for anyone who's interested. I'll answer more questions and tell you other stories if you're interested in that. We'll do hallway con, okay? My band of bathrobed brothers will come with us, and we'll go out and do hallway con. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you. No. It's all good, man. It's all good.